afternoon, Constitutional Week people. I have come to talk to you about recipes that originated in the colonial times here in the United States, before we were in the United States. Anyway, my ancestors, I'm discovering, have come from Germany and Ireland and Scotland and England and Holland, and it probably accounts for some of the peculiar foods that I was raised with. Peculiar as in chow chow, pepper pot, which was apparently given the credit to a Baker General of the Constitutional Army, and mush, another staple that we had, and then fried mush, and then shoe fly pie, and all of these peculiar things. And I never knew what the derivation was. So in my time sitting and listening to the Constitution Week performances at the library every year for about the last 5 years, I discovered that I have recipes from that era. And so I started doing a little research, and I brought a few of those things in. One of the things I brought, and so I'm sharing with you just a few of the recipes today. The first one is scalloped oysters, and that's a treat that we had every holiday. In the R months, because they're not good. Oysters are not good unless the month has an R in it. I don't know why. I guess probably because it's cold weather times when the oysters flourish. Anyway, some of my ancestors from Scotland came into Chesapeake Bay, and they found oysters in abundance, which is a good thing, because the Mayflower folks that were also some ancestors of mine, they too came here with little food to eat, and so they needed to scavenge everywhere they can. And so oysters and seafood got them through the first winter here in the colonies. So scalloped oysters is a recipe with crunched up crackers and milk and butter and all of that good stuff, and baked in the oven. And it was a big deal to us, and as I read it, I think it's not a big deal. Then I was asked to distinguish between the two varieties of shoe fly pie. There is the wet bottom, and then there's the dry bottom shoe fly pie, which is what my family always ate. This is the precursor of gingerbread. It is actually cake, even though it says it's pie. And it's sort of like gingerbread with no flavoring. I thought it was wonderful. Anyway, pie crust with molasses and flour and crumbs at the top, kind of like a coffee cake. Anyway, that one I was not exactly able to determine where it came from. I always thought my parents grew up in Pennsylvania Dutch country, and this was just north of Philadelphia, and that's where all my ancestors were. And I really thought that perhaps this was a German food, Dutch, they call them Pennsylvania Dutch, German. Anyway, and I don't think it was, because they found it, and some of these food historians or archaeologists have discovered it in the Midwest when it got picked up again. So anyway, regardless of where it comes from, it is a staple in the Pennsylvania Dutch era. Okay, so and shoe fly, and so the dry bottom is cakey all the way through. It's the same recipe, but mixed different to get the wet bottom. So it's like a gooey substance at the bottom, and then a little cake and some crumbs. But I grew up in dry bottom, loved it. And that's what I bring to the Constitution Week for everybody to eat. Now, another thing that I brought was, wait a minute here. What are all these? Oh, I see. In my research, I just discovered hermits, which I think are a delightful bar cookie. And these really go back, way, way back into the Middle East. And the recipes were carried from the Middle East to Britain, where they became a staple and were then brought over to the United States. In 1747, they were called little plum cakes. So that's another way of thinking of them. So the Crusaders brought them to England. It was also called Middle medieval gingerbread. Okay, so that has spices coming from West Indies, which was a big trade. Incidentally, with the West Indies trade, you know, we got the coconut and all that stuff. The colonists, were boycotting some of the West Indies spices that came over, just like they did with the tea, because they were taxed by the British. So there were times when they couldn't get some of this stuff. So maybe that's why our choux-fleur pie has very little flavor. Okay, then I discovered in my research a recipe that we always had at Easter time. And that was for little cookies, little rabbit cookies, that were made with a rolled up coconut and condensed milk and confectionery sugar. You roll them up into little balls and cool them real good, and then you dip them in bittersweet chocolate. And those were your Easter eggs. Oddly enough, that recipe is in Martha Washington's cookbook. So, except she put cherries in. Remember cherry and cutting the cherry tree down and all that? Well, Martha got some cherries regardless. And sometimes she put nuts in them, but we just had plain ones. Okay, and this is maybe my favorite recipe. I will call it what it is. It's Myrtle Miller, that's my mother's name, Myrtle McCullough Miller's carrot pudding. And this was another sweet treat that we got at holidays only. And in here we grate up carrots, potatoes, suet. We were great consumers of suet and lard. That was really one of our mainstays. You can perhaps tell. Anyway, and raisins and sugar and flour and that. And then we take a coffee can, grease it, and put this concoction in there and boil it, steam it for 3 hours, and then serve it with a light lemon sauce. It was absolutely divine. Now, back to Myrtle Miller, my mother, Myrtle McCullough Miller. Her sister, my last aunt, passed away this week at the tender age of 101. And so I would like to dedicate this little time with us together on our Pennsylvania Dutch recipes to my Aunt Millie. Thank you.